Ever wonder what psychologists talk about over coffee? I'm Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, where I specialize in rehab and health psychology and acceptance and commitment therapy.
And I'm Diana Hill, a clinical psychologist in Seaside, Santa Barbara, California, where I specialize in mindfulness and values-based approaches to therapy.
In this podcast, we bring psychology research into practice by discussing topics from psychology with experts in the field and with each other. You'll get a glimpse into the books we read, the research we think is interesting, and the ideas from psychology that we use to thrive in our own lives.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. Debbie, it's good to see you today.
Anna, good to see you too.
So I have an interview with a clinical psychologist and meditation teacher that is here in Santa Barbara and also an author of a new book that just came out called Heartwork. And I'm really excited to share it with our listeners because it has some nice practical tools that they'll be able to use at home. And I sent it to you, and I'm wondering if you cracked it open and read a little bit of it.
I did. Thank you so much. What a nice gift and a lovely surprise to find this book on my front porch. Yeah, so I just got it the other day, so I've just started taking a peek at it. It's about the path toward self-compassion, and I'm just in the first few chapters, but it looks really intriguing. Diana, do you practice self-compassion with your clients in your practice very much, or is this new to you?
This is something that I've been practicing for a while, and I think my entry point was really more through Tara Brach and some of her practices, but I have been doing the type of self-compassion that Radhule Weininger talks about, which is more of a mantra-based mindfulness where you're saying some meditations to yourself that you repeat over time with your breath when you're in a meditation practice, and it's pretty powerful. What about you? How do you practice it? Self-compassion.
You know, I have it's newer to me, I would say. I think the exercise I've done with clients frequently, though, is where I have them get in contact with someone in their life who's not themselves, who's suffering in some way, and sort of contact compassion toward that other person. And usually people are able to do that fairly well. And then that comes easily for most people. And then I have them contact something that they themselves are suffering with, and to try to turn that same sense of compassion toward themselves. And what I typically find, and this is true for me too, and I think it's true for most of the clients that I've done this with, is that it's much harder to be compassionate toward ourselves than it is to be compassionate toward others. Mm-hmm. So I think that this book, the work in this book, is really going to be a nice next step for people who are having a hard time with that self-compassion.
Yes. So yeah. I look forward to seeing if you do some of these practices with your clients, and we can check in at another time, see how it works. And there's a real also special treat to today's interview in that Dr. Radhule is going to lead us through a loving kindness practice at the end of the interview. So go ahead and listen to the interview, go for a walk, listen in the car, and then save that little last piece so that you can go home and practice it with your meditation. Or if you don't have a meditation, just try it out. It could be a nice tool to use.
How wonderful. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Dr. Radhule Weininger is a clinical psychologist and teacher of Buddhist meditation and Buddhist psychology, and is the founder and guiding teacher of the One Dharma Sangha, as well as the resident teacher of mindfulness practice at La Casa de Maria in Santa Barbara, California. She was mentored in her teaching by Jack Kornfield, and also Jack Kornfield wrote the foreword to her book that we're going to be talking about today, which is called Heartwork, The Path of Self-Compassion by Shambhala Publications. And it's really an honor for me to have Dr. Weininger on our show today. And I really first want to thank you for everything that you offer our community. So not only is Dr. Weininger a psychologist and Buddhist meditation teacher, she offers so many free programming for our community almost every day of the week. She's offering compassion practices to our community, sitting meditations, as well as interdisciplinary conversations on compassion, has really created a lot of sacred spaces for us in Santa Barbara, places where people can come that are peaceful and have a sense of community and belonging. So thank you so much, Dr. Weininger. And today we want to talk a bit about Heartwork. So maybe we can start with your personal story, which you share in the book Heartwork, about what led you to Buddhism and some of your history.
All right. Thank you for asking. I came across a Buddhist practice in 1979, 1980. I was 22, 23-year-old then, and I was quite an unhappy young medical student. I had a hard time with myself, my family, studies. I had a lot of doubts in life, and that culminated when I had two big car accidents, and I was for 2 months in the hospital. And then I ended up taking some time off and going with my boyfriend then to Sri Lanka, which was kind of a haven for German medical students who were a little bit alternative. We studied acupuncture there. But as it happens, I kind of made a beeline for a Buddhist monastery. Not really planned, but it just kind of happened that I did. And so after meeting this really wonderful, mysterious old monk by chance in Colombo, I ended up for 2 months in this monastery doing a mindfulness, quite a strict mindfulness practice. And even though I wasn't really very knowledgeable about Buddhism, I just had an intuitive, instinctive feeling that this would be helping me with my internal pain and my feeling of brokenness and my doubts and my lack of direction. And so I ended up in this monastery, Black Rock Hermitage in Sri Lanka, which really became amazing 2 months. Very hard, because sitting 8 to 10 hours a day is really hard. And but also I found a sense of inner center and deeper peace, which I didn't know that was there. It was actually quite a surprise to me to find peace at the bottom of it all. And then when I went back to Germany, I'm from Germany, and I completed my medical school, I just never let go of this practice. I always felt quite, committed to this practice. And for years, it became something that helped me. It was something that gave me a sense of inner refuge, inner home. But then I think we might talk about that later. It became also part of my offering to other people.
Mm-hmm. So you went on to become a clinical psychologist and sort of moved out of the medical field and into psychology. And it really seems that you incorporate these principles and practices, and they inform you as a clinical psychologist. And then also in your book, that your background in psychology really informs your understanding of Buddhism and the principles as well. Can you talk about that, of how each inform each other, how your practice informs your meditation and your meditation informs your practice when working with clients?
Well, when I first started to study psychology, which was in the middle 80s in San Francisco, I kind of had this idea that my spiritual and my psychological practice should be kept separate. Mm-hmm. That's how it was taught then. It's like to be too spiritual was just, I don't know, had a bit of a flaky name to it. And I wanted to be serious. I wanted to know what the analysts know and the Jungians know and whoever knew. And so for a while, I kept it a little bit artificially separate, even though I felt it was really, both were helpful to me. I had my practice and I went to therapy and I got my PhD in psychology. So it took me a while to bring it together. And at first I was more like what you might call a mindful therapist. Like I used my mindfulness practice to be present, to raise my awareness, to be more attentive, to be more compassionate in what I was already doing as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist. And I remember then in the early 2000s, when Jack Kornfield became my mentor, we had this quite important conversation where he asked me, "Do you meditate with your clients?" And I said, "Oh, no, isn't that bad boundaries? And you should keep this apart," and all those kinds of things which we learned then. And he said, "Oh, Radhule, get over it." And so in a way, we talked about it for a while, and I realized as long as I'm aware of what I'm doing, and as long as I don't push on my clients something that they don't want, so I don't meditate with every one of my clients. Just when I really feel it's really helpful, there is an opening, there's maybe anxiety or depression, and there's an interest. So then I might bring meditation in now and then. But it really helped me to kind of rethink psychotherapy in a little bit. And we can go on more about that later if you like. The other way around, how psychotherapy is useful in spiritual practice, I think it's very useful. In the early 80s, I spent quite a bit of time in a spiritual center in Switzerland. I was part of the staff. I spent a lot of time in retreat centers, on retreats. And I realized that there were quite a few people who tried to bypass their psychological problems by becoming spiritual. And there is a wonderful article by John Welwood where he writes about the spiritual bypass, where instead of feeling our pain, actually facing the hurt we have experienced in our families, where we try to bypass those uncomfortable, maybe messy feelings by meditating or by blissing out or by, just avoiding it. And I have seen, especially in spiritual centers, that very often can bite us in the heel. And so I guess I hadn't really planned it that way, but I always practiced my meditation and I was in psychotherapy side by side, not knowing really that that's what I would recommend these days. But it worked very well for me. I thought it was a good thing. Sometimes I wish that my therapists had understood my spiritual path a little better. I think they kind of accepted it, but they didn't know about it. They were wondering whether this was some kind of oceanic enmeshment or regression or whatever theories were flying around. But I think I had some wonderful therapists, and I think often they realized, even though they didn't quite understand what I was doing, that they saw it was helping me. And my spiritual teachers, well, I think when I was in Sri Lanka, there wasn't a great psychological understanding. Like even self-compassion or compassion wasn't really a word that was used. And was a little bit diehard. And, and I can talk more about that later, because one comes really face to face to one's mind and heart in quite an intense way. and a bit of more psychological understanding might have been helpful. But I survived and I learned a lot, and I had to find that out my own way, what helps me and my clients. But then when I met Jack Kornfield in the United States, once I came here in '86, I think I met him for the first time. He was also a clinical psychologist and a meditation teacher, and he actually felt from the beginning those two belong together. So, is that answering your question?
Yes. So it seems that you've come to a place in your career and your personal life where there's a lot of integrity and alignment between what you're doing in your own personal spiritual practices and also how you're approaching your work with clients. And you when you read Heartwork, you really hear that message of how these practices have transformed you as well as your work with your clients, and a level of integrity there. And I guess one question that just came to mind for me is that the concept of mindfulness has gotten so mainstream. There's mindfulness for lawyers, there's mindfulness for plumbers, and a lot of times what I'm noticing is that there's even in the field of psychology, there's therapists that are teaching mindfulness but may not have their own practice or may not have the spiritual connection that you're talking about. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on that.
Interesting. Well, maybe I should try to, I guess I'm a little bit agnostic about this. Yes, maybe my first instinctual feeling is that I think has helped me a lot to have my practice. I actually don't know how I would teach this without having an authentic practice and going always back to my practice. When I definitely feel I need 1 or 2 long retreats every year to just kind of keep myself in a state of clarity, maybe balance, clean my own side of the street, spiritually and psychologically speaking. And so for my own sense of integrity, that is what works. However, I hear really good things about deep tea and other more briefer methods. And who am I to say that doesn't help somebody in a treatment center to have training by somebody who may not have that depth of experience. And actually, I had recently in relating experience, I was asked by UCSB to teach a 1-year facilitator training for lots of their staff members, like social workers, nutritionists, drug and alcohol abuse counselors, wellness counselors. It was actually for the Student Wellness Center. And many of them had almost no experience. And at first I was really confronted with this problem, and maybe also with my own arrogance. And so I was wondering, will this work? And so I took this job on. I'm still supervising them. And we tried to have several 3-day retreats. So we had a year training and several kind of in-depth trainings, and everybody committed to have an ongoing practice now. Everybody downloaded the 10% Happier app. And I have to say they're doing quite a decent job to teach to the students. Mm-hmm. And I think one important thing is they are, for other reasons, already used to teaching, because they're already wellness teachers. So maybe they were able to integrate this knowledge and teach it well. And this is to very beginning students on campus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I imagine. So I actually was surprised how well it worked.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the sense is not certain whether you need to have a meditation practice to teach some of these principles, but certain as to if you do have one, it is most likely to benefit you teaching the principles because you had that inner experience. And
Well,
yeah,
I think even those young teachers on campus, they now have a meditation
yeah,
practice.
yeah,
I don't know about somebody not having any meditation practice. I just feel whenever I teach meditation, I come from my own experience. I'm not just reading pages,
right,
lines in
right.
a book. So I think maybe I could be a little flexible on how long this practice has been, but it would be good if people practiced a little bit.
Yes. Can you speak a bit to the concept of self-compassion? So, one wing is mindful awareness, and that's gotten very popular in Western psychology. And then a lot of the focus of your book is around self-compassion, and you talk about 9 Heartwork practices that cultivate
Yeah.
self-compassion. So, can you just start by defining for yourself how you define self-compassion, and then we can talk a bit more about some of the practices you teach.
Well, compassion, compatio in Latin, really means suffering with another's suffering or our own suffering. It's about a tenderness of the heart. Well, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's also an aspect of compassion which is an understanding of all our interconnectedness. So if we all know we are connected, we are kin, we are relatives, how would we not care? And so I think there's a bit of an understanding aspect to compassion, but mainly it's a feeling aspect. It's, I think Sharon Salzberg said, it's the quivering of the heart in the face of another's pain. And so it's a gradual softening of our capacity to feel with, to empathize with, to be with another suffering. And like I think some old wise men said, they are the 2 wings that allow the bird to fly: wisdom on the one side and compassion on the other side. And we need to develop both to be full human beings. If we are too much on the wisdom side, then we could become detached or a bit cold-hearted or judgmental. And if we are on too much on the compassion side, I read something funny recently, then we are good-hearted fools. I love that, good-hearted fools. But on the other hand, if the world was full of good-hearted fools, maybe that would be okay. But I guess for most of us, it's good to have both wisdom and compassion. So it's basically a reaching out in a heartfelt I and thou, not a horizontal, not a hierarchical reaching out to another one. Doesn't mean we feel better than another person, but we feel with another person.
And what does that look like when you're practicing it towards yourself in terms of a self-compassion?
Right. So, which is often for many of us, especially from a Western background, sometimes a difficult step to have this tenderness of the heart towards our own self, our own pain, our human condition, our own suffering, our own predicaments, whether they're internal or external, or in our relationships, or financially, or environmentally, or whatever it might be. And I think self-compassion can be practiced in 2 different ways, many different ways, but I might just point out two major ways. One is, I think, as we practice mindfulness meditation, moment to moment, non-judgmental awareness of whatever comes up in our minds, we see a lot. It's like when you see, you see. We see how angry we are, how frustrated we are. Sometimes we realize how little meaning we have in life. Sometimes we realize how restless we are, or how envious or ashamed or guilty we feel. And so it's not easy to see all that inside of ourselves. I think that's why we often distract ourselves so immensely, because it's just so hard to look inside. So in order to really accurately be with what's there inside to see, it's much easier to do that when we have a sense of compassion, a sense of tenderness, a sense of understanding and patience for our human condition. Because to be human means to be fallible. Suffering is part of our human condition. So in that way, I could see self-compassion really important, kind of built into the mindfulness practice. And I think there's one practice, the loving awareness practice, which is in the end of the teaching just straight mindfulness that comes in, where we cultivate a little bit of that, compassion within mindfulness. And then there's what is called in Buddhist philosophy the Brahma Viharas, or in Tibetan philosophy the Four Immeasurables. Traditionally, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And I think there are a few other ones like forgiveness, gratitude, appreciation. You can probably add a few other ones to that too, which are the qualities of the heart. And it's seen that there is a value in cultivating these practices of the heart. And we know now, I think ancient practitioners knew, and we know now in science, we know now through studying neuroplasticity, that we can cultivate that what we want to see more of. Like the psychologist William James said, what we pay attention to becomes reality. And what we pay attention to becomes a new neural pathwork. So I think cultivating intentionally those qualities of the heart can be really important. It's like learning to drive a car. At first, we really have to see what we are doing, and after a while, it becomes quite automatic or spontaneous.
One of the ways that you teach self-compassion and the practices in your book is through using phrases that you speak to yourself. Can you speak to some of the phrases that or give examples of some of the phrases that a person would use, and what that would look like in a meditation practice?
Okay, so maybe I'll now speak a little bit towards the second kind of, cultivating compassion for oneself. So the original phrases in metta practice were quite wonderful, but a little bit formulaic. And I think they were first taught by Sharon Salzberg in the 80s, and we were all quite excited about that. May you be happy, may you be well, may you be safe, may you be free. And what some of us, or maybe many of us, realized, even though we liked those phrases, they were a bit formulaic and a bit generic, and they didn't always quite hit the spot. And so one thing I try to work on by myself and with my editor is how to make these phrases more relevant and accessible. And I realized when I always try things out on myself. So on these long retreats, I I work these phrases for myself, for my own suffering. And I just realized when they were more accessible and relevant to my particular challenge, they would be more useful and they would calm me down more and they would give me more of a sense of nurturing and coming to a sense of peace. So, for example, I would start with, may I be safe from inner and outer dangers. May I live my life with ease. May I be compassionate with myself when I feel vulnerable and afraid. For example, or may I extend tenderness towards myself as I'm going through this very hard time in my life. So, may I be patient and gentle with myself as I experience this bout of shame, something like that.
And would you work with a client to help personalize those statements for them as well?
Yeah. Sometimes we kind of work on them together. Mm-hmm. And maybe I send my client home with some of those phrases we came up with.
Mm-hmm. Which is very different from probably how our mind usually works when we're facing difficulty or shame. And usually the languaging that maybe have programmed from a long time ago that we tend to go to, that's more automatic and self-critical or harsh. So it is a reprogramming of how you relate to yourself when you're experiencing difficulty. One of the things that that you alluded to is that in psychotherapy practice, part of the work is being able to go into and feel what you don't want to feel. Right. And so you're holding that while you're bringing compassion to it. And I wonder, sometimes when I work with clients, I will get the statement from them that it's just too intense to go there. And I'm too afraid to go there, or I just can't feel this. What is your response to that? How do you approach that?
Well, I think whether it's psychotherapy or meditation, we humans have a little bit of an avoidance to go into pain. And so often we have to come to a point where we are willing to be with some of that pain. And I was just reminded of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, where he says, it's the pain that makes the crack it's the pain that cracks the shell that encloses our understanding. So it's the pain that cracks the shell that encloses our ego or our understanding. And I think Leonard Cohen said it in a more contemporary version. It's the crack where the light comes in. So yes, that is right. And hopefully we have a good enough therapeutic relationship that allows people to kind of go a little bit, to put their toe into the water. And most of the time people come to us who are already a little bit in pain. It's not usually somebody who comes in not in pain saying, well, should I? It's usually there's already a little bit of a crack when people come. And I see that also in meditation groups. We Westerners come usually to meditation groups. We have a little bit of pain. But then maybe what I would say to a client or a student is to say, yeah, I really understand that reluctance. It really feels counterintuitive. And that I myself on my path have felt similarly. That why would I want to look at something that is painful? But, sometimes we have to look at something to come out the other side. It's like the mythical journey into the underworld, to come out in the other side of greater awareness and greater well-being and greater health. We sometimes have to go through the forest. And maybe I also would I would quote, do you know the psychologist Eugene Gentling? Um, he talked about the felt sense, because we really have to come to the felt sense of our suffering. It's not just about the idea of it. We have to come to the felt sense of it. And here's a tiny little quote. Psychologist Eugene Gentling called the felt sense a special kind of internal bodily awareness, a body sense of meaning, which the conscious mind is initially unable to articulate. The felt sense not only brings you into the present moment, but it increases relaxed alertness. The moment you experience the felt sense of painful feelings is exactly when change can happen. The felt sense helps you recognize when you're afraid, hurt, angry, or ashamed, and to gain insight into the meaning of that experience for you. The depth of this understanding allows you to access the ability to extend compassion to yourself and to others. Then something in your way of being starts to reconfigure, and you gain a healthier understanding of yourself, and you can become increasingly free. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think Gentling really here explained to us why it is important to come to a felt sense of our suffering, because it is the present moment exactly where change can happen. Or I might quote Carl Rogers, who says, change comes about when we truly are what we are, and not when we are trying to be what we are not. So when we are trying to look all wonderful and upbeat, but we are really sad, then change cannot happen, and we are kind of stuck. So in a way, it's also a little bit about a certain kind of faith or trust, which one learns as one works and practices and does psychotherapy. The trust, when we put one step in front of the next, that doors will open.
So in Heartwork, you start with developing a mindful awareness practice, which is sort of the entryway to that felt sense. And then you move into some practices for compassion for self and compassion for other. And then you also developed a practice for how to respond to our emotional reactions when they arise. And you call it the compassionate choice practice. And it really feels like that is the beautiful marriage of psychology and your Buddhist background in the worksheets that you created. Can you speak to the compassionate choice practice and what it offers?
I came to the compassionate choice practice really, about 8 years ago. And what happened is I always felt there was this gap between my psychotherapy practice and my spiritual practice. And also I felt that my diligent every morning meditation sometimes wouldn't help me when I was upset during the day. And the same with my clients. And so then I was invited to a training with famous researcher on emotions, Paul Ekman and Alan Wallace. They gave this 6-week training in Thailand. And so where we learned all about triggers and how our emotions work and how triggers were leading to body feelings, to emotions, to acting out and how difficult it is to breathe a little bit of awareness or oxygen into this process. And while I was at this training for 6 weeks, which was useful, but some of it was quite researchy. So me being the clinician, I immediately in my mind started to transpose what I learned into how can I make this practical for myself and my clients. And so while I was having this precious time there for 6 weeks, I came up with the compassionate choice practice, which looks at times when we have been triggered, and which means something sparks an immediate uncomfortable feeling. This trigger can be set by internal thoughts. Sometimes we just trigger ourselves with a memory, or by external events. And so what can we do when that happens? How can we not just be totally at the mercy, sitting ducks to those events? And so I started to write down every time I got triggered, let's say during this 6-week training, I would start to keep note what actually was happening and how would that coincide what Paul Ekman was teaching. So I realized right after the trigger would come the sensation, a body feeling. For example, a tightening in the belly, a constriction near the heart, a flushed face, whatever it might be. And then I noticed that right after that, or in close vicinity, was an emotion. And sometimes one was first and sometimes the other, but they were in close vicinity. That feelings would come up like anger, fear, embarrassment, indignation, or some other unpleasant emotion. And then I realized, and maybe that comes from my psychodynamic training, that often these triggers unearthed something from the past. Like one day in this training, this woman sat in my chair. After 2 weeks, this had been my chair. And I was just very upset. She just had moved my stuff. I don't know if she knew or not. Doesn't matter. There I was without my chair. And I realized that brought up feelings for me from when I was very little. And I felt really kind of not seen and not respected by my family and my cousins. And so that's why I put in this phrase, automatic association. What comes up? And it's not about analyzing it, more about tagging it. My boss reminds me of my father. Okay, so just noticing. And I realized noticing where it was coming from without really going into it in depth. Just, it's Uncle Peter, or it's whatever. Being 3 years old kind of gave me a sense of feeling understood, a sense of my heart would calm down. That's what it is. And then I realized sometimes we make very quick emotional conclusions that follow that, like, I'm not worthy, or life never goes well for me, or people don't like me, or whatever it might be. I think maybe that's what I felt, with this woman with the chair said, women just don't like me. Something like that. And then an urge to act, either externally, I want to go and yell at her, I want to tell the organizers, or maybe just internally ruminating, why is this happening to me? Why da 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 da? And then I realized, and I learned that from Paul Ekman, it's important to interrupt that process and take a little time out. Maybe I might call it here a mindful time out, where I sit for a moment. I would walk around a big field and breathe. I would meditate. I would, hug a tree, whatever helps you to feel again a little bit in balance. Or maybe you just go to the bathroom and take 10 breaths and watch your exhale. And then I would come to the second half of this process, and I would say, actually, what helps me to watch myself in this process with compassionate awareness. Like, no wonder this triggers me, because I was treated like this as a kid. So when this woman sat in my chair, which is not a big deal really, no wonder that really throws me so out of balance. And then I would already feel calmer and more kind of less excited. And then I would be able to look a little bit with a bigger perspective, which I call a compassionate evaluation. Like, okay, maybe a chair is just a chair, or maybe we can find different solutions, or maybe I should just wait a day, or whatever it might be. And then that would come to the compassionate choice, where we respond with more awareness, skill, and care. And I think for me here, actually, the compassionate choice was to wait a day. And then eventually I would write her a little note and I said, I was just wondering if you were aware. But it's okay. And I think what we did in the end, we just put another chair there, so everybody was able to sit there, and it was all okay. And it actually was a really good learning experience for me. So I was very grateful to the chair episode.
Yes.
It helped me.
And in your book, Heartwork, you have the layout of the questions to step you through each of those, and some worksheets that people can work through if they want to practice this for themselves. And I really like the structure, because you know me in structure. I like the structure of it, but also the just the real sort of integration of Western understanding of emotion, how emotions develop and the course of emotions, but then also the wisdom and experience that you worked through in terms of how to develop more compassion for self in the process. So thank you. And one of the things that I asked Radhule for when we first started is for her to share a meditation with us, and it's a real gift. She offers beautiful meditations, and I was thinking that we could close today with a meditation from Radhule, a loving kindness, compassionate meditation, about 5 minutes long. So if you are listening, and maybe you could either pause this if you're driving and save it for when you get home, or you're walking, save it for a time that you can carve out for yourself to give yourself this gift. Radhule will lead us in a meditation as we close.
Would you like a self-compassion meditation,
Yeah.
or mindfulness, or what kind of meditation?
I think a self-compassion meditation would be very nice. Yeah.
That'd be good. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was really lovely to talk to you. Could have talked another hour with you.
Thank
It was
you.
really wonderful. Thank you so much.
The loving kindness practice. Allow yourself to settle into the sensations in your body. Notice the touch between your body, the chair, the cushion, the ground. And allow your whole body to be filled with presence. Notice what is going on in your body, heart, and mind. what is comfortable and what is uncomfortable, what is easy and what is challenging. Just be aware of it. And while holding yourself with loving awareness, you may say the following words with kindness to yourself. May my heart be full of love and kindness. May I live my life with ease. May I be free from inner and outer danger to my body, heart, and mind. May my mind and heart be free from painful thoughts and feelings. May I accept my life with all its challenges and opportunities. May my mind and heart be open like the sky to all that flowers through. May my mind and heart be open like the sky to all that flows through. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May I find the support I need. May life rise up to meet me.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and iTunes. You can also find us at www.offtheclockpsych.com. That's offtheclock, psych.com. Music by John Gu and Susie Stevens.